Shalom to all my brothers and sisters. Daniel chapter 9 verses 24 through 29. Daniel 9 is without a doubt, to Christians who are very, very serious about their missionary work and messianics as well, will point to Daniel chapter 9 in these specific passages to show to the Jewish people that the Messiah was supposed to come before the destruction of the second temple. Now the truth is, this is a brief presentation. I have a full-blown presentation. If you look for it for Daniel chapter 9, I really recommend you watch that whole presentation because it goes into many more details. But here's a brief summary of why Daniel 9 in a Christian Bible is an absolute theological crime scene. Now, what the church did to Daniel chapter 9, and among many other chapters, Isaiah 53, and many other of the blatant, purposeful mistranslations and misquotes and made up verses, Daniel chapter 9 is the worst of the worst of the worst. Literally, the church molested the text of Daniel chapter 9. And I know that's a very harsh word, molested. But to me, that's a mild word for what they did to Daniel chapter 9. First of all, what the church did, in just a brief summary of what happened. The church changed the word, which is Mashiach in Hebrew. It means anointed. Anointed. Anyone who even knows a little bit about Hebrew knows that it means anointed. Now, in every other passage where the word Mashiach comes up in the Hebrew, the church translated it correctly as anointed. But only here in Daniel chapter 9, specifically 24 through 27, did the church mistranslate it to say the Messiah, capital M, the Messiah. Now, what's the problem here? The problem is there is no capitals in Hebrew. So the point that they're emphasizing the Messiah. And the Hebrew does not say the Messiah, ha-Mashiach. It says an anointed Mashiach. So they added the word the to emphasize and put capital M to mean the Messiah. Another thing that the church did was they actually, if you're looking at a Jewish Tanakh, the Hebrew scriptures preserved by the real Israelites, the Jews, through history. In any Hebrew scriptures you look at, made by the real Israelites, the Jews, you will see that Daniel chapter 9, in these passages, it's very clear. There are two periods separated, two periods and two Mashiachs. So it's speaking about two different time periods and two Mashiachs. Not one capital M Messiah, but an actual anointed one, and then another anointed one in one period and another period. So what the church did was they mangled Daniel chapter 9 to cut it in half, mesh it into one time period and one capital M Messiah, because they want to make make it appear as if the Messiah was supposed to come before the destruction of the second temple. And they also added the words, but not for himself. But not for himself. It will be a vicarious atonement. This also does not appear in the Hebrew. Does not appear that way. It's completely mistranslated. It doesn't appear like that. So, if you look at a Jewish scripture, Tanakh, you will see the proper translation is two time periods, two anointed ones. Now people will ask, well, who is this anointed one? What's going on? And we say, well, I will say to you, like I always say in the videos, if you don't read Daniel chapter 9, if you want to stick to just Daniel chapter 9, Daniel assumed, like all the other prophets, that you wouldn't just parachute down on a verse, but you would read the whole chapter in its context. And if the chapter is not fully the context, then read the chapter before, read the chapter after. But that's the problem with so many people, is they just want to parachute and cherry pick verses for their agenda-driven beliefs. That's not the way we should study. Now, real Jews, real Israelites, we study every single day in context in the original language. So therefore, when people try to pull this game, purposefully or accidentally, we are able to correct the claims made by any group, period. It's all about context. What is going on? What is Daniel praying about? Read Daniel chapter 9, start at verse 1. What is he praying about? What is he distressed about? And he tells you right in the very beginning, his own words. He says, I was praying and I was contemplating the prophecies in Jeremiah. What was going on? It tells you right in the beginning of Daniel that Darius the Mede, the Persian, basically the Persians have taken over Babylon. Babylon was destroyed. And Daniel was reading the prophecies in Jeremiah, specifically Jeremiah chapter 25 verse 12 and Jeremiah chapter 29 verse 10. And he was seeing these two prophecies in two different chapters and meshing them together and thinking that all of these fulfillments, meaning going back to Israel and rebuilding the temple, was supposed to happen as soon as Babylon was destroyed. But he was seeing that nothing was happening. They were stuck there still in Babylon, even though the Persians have taken over. He's like, oh my God. Oh my God. The curses of Deuteronomy chapter 26 are upon us. The curses that say that if you continue in your disobedience, you will be punished 7 times what I told you, you would be punished. So therefore, Daniel, read it for yourselves. The very beginning of Daniel, he begins to pray one of the greatest prayers of all time. He's praying to God saying, oh my God, we have sinned against you. I mean, it's one of the greatest. If you really want a great cry, you read Daniel chapter 9 from the beginning to the end. And what happens? Gabriel comes down, the angel Gabriel comes and clarifies to him what he is missing. Daniel conflated the two passages together, thought it was supposed to happen all at once. And Gabriel clarified that message to him. So therefore, if you don't have a Jewish Tanakh, the Hebrew scriptures, you're going to be in a lot of trouble because you are looking, if you're looking in a Christian Bible, you're looking at a crime scene. Another thing is that the church, this is a later thing that happened with Daniel chapter 9. This is not old. The Christian Bible, the Greek Testament, never ever quotes Daniel chapter 9. Considering how important Daniel chapter 9 is to the Christian today, you would think that the Gospels absolutely would have mentioned this passage. But there's no mention of this prophecy. Think about how important this prophecy would be to actually calculate the date the Messiah was to be killed and wiped off the earth. They would have quoted it, but it wasn't. This was a very, very late invention by the church. We're talking about in the early 1800s. So yes, it was a later invention. But another thing that the church did early on was, interestingly, if you're looking at Jewish scriptures, in the Jewish scriptures, Tanakh, Hebrew scriptures, always after Daniel chapter 9, you will always see in a Hebrew scriptures, Daniel is followed by the book of Ezra. Now, if you have a Christian Bible, go to Daniel and flip to the next book. Ezra's not there. Where is Ezra put? Way towards the Judges, Kings, way in the back there. It doesn't follow Daniel. Now, I want you to read Ezra chapter 1, verses 1 through 5. And then you'll see why the church removed Ezra from being after Daniel. Because Ezra basically tells you, yet yes, what Daniel was hoping to happen was fulfilled. What Jeremiah prophesied was fulfilled right after the book of Daniel and the book of Ezra. It tells you that they gave the decree to go back to Israel to rebuild the temple. So therefore, study in context. Study Daniel chapter 9 in context from the beginning to the end. And this is why it's so important that so many people don't study context. They parachute down on a verse or they cherry pick verses for their own purposes. But a lot of times, this is not the person's fault. This is how they were taught. This is how they were trained to read Scripture. to mine the Hebrew Scriptures, to find passages that fit their belief or what they're being taught. So again, study hard, study in context. If you don't, you will always get yourself in trouble. If you don't study in context, you will always be in trouble, because the Hebrew Scriptures was meant to be studied carefully and in context. Shalom.